Bell Labs, 1954. The fact is after operating these things for about 4 years, Bell Lab very quietly tore them out. It wasn't really successful because it was god-awful expensive. The first completely cost-effective application of solar, and the development of solar has always been movement from one niche market to another. It always sells as the least cost energy source in the market that it moves into. And what that does is because it sells a high enough volume in that market, the prices drop, and then it moves into the next niche, and then into the next niche. And the entire history of photovoltaics, since 54 to 2013, has been a series of niche market moves. Yep. Why is it? This thing is skipping Vanguard. Oh, okay, Vanguard's out of sequence. Okay. This is the first cost-effective application of solar. How much did these solar modules in this satellite cost? They cost $1,760 a watt. It's not electronics, it's jewelry. It was manufactured like jewelry is manufactured, hand-sliced. One thing, though, I think is real fascinating about this particular system is these were all backside contact solar cells. Who makes backside contact solar cells? SunPower, the most efficient cells on the market. And the way they make them more efficient is by using backside contact, by using the oldest commercial technology in the marketplace. And there's a lesson to be learned in that. That innovation doesn't always look like you think it does. And I love it too. This thing with 6 cells in it was capable of generating 1 watt. It's a 1 watt cost-effective solar system. But you know, you think about it, how else you can run a satellite for any length of time? You can run an extension cord up to it. There's nothing else that could supply the power. Every other satellite that was going up at the time, the Russian stuff, was all based on batteries, and the batteries would die. Eventually, after I think it was 6 years of operation, the batteries in this died. Most of the Russian stuff was lasting 6 weeks. And this thing is still in orbit. It's still in orbit. One day I would love to see a space mission specifically to retrieve this thing. And I would make 20-to-1 bets on the cells in this still being good. You know, but they were handmade items. Of course they're going to be good. You know, despite faltering attempts to commercialize silicon cells in the 50s and 60s, it was only successful in satellites. But it became the accepted energy source in space applications and still is. By 1960, Hoffman Electronics, who was making a lot of stuff for the space industry, developed terrestrial cells with 14% efficiency. What's the average efficiency of a polycrystalline cell today? About 14%, yeah. Okay, that brings, I want to stop showing overheads for a second and focus on my props here. Because what we have here is one of the first successful terrestrial modules. This was built by Arco. This is a 1980 module. It was 32 watts rated. We flash tested it at Silicon Energy a while back, and it flash tested at 32 watts. after over 30 years of operation. And, I look at this module and I look at this new module. This is actually a 2008 module. It's a Sharp. And I ask myself, gee, what have we changed? Oh, wow, we're using almost square wafers. We made them bigger, so they're heavier, harder to carry. And this had a junction box on the back side of it, so you could wire it any way you wanted. These modules all have pigtails, so you don't have any options in how to wire them. So we've used bigger wafers, we've used bigger modules, we've made the frames weaker. How many changes is there in this product from that one? 4. 4 significant changes in over 30 years of design. By any definition, this is a moribund industry. It's just not changing. And if it's going to survive, anybody within this industry that's going to survive in the next 5 years is going to have to undergo dramatic changes. The modules that we're seeing today, I think it'll hold there. The modules we're seeing today are not the modules we're going to see tomorrow. You want to know what they're going to be like? I can't tell you. I don't know. If I could, I'd be rich. But I know that there's more people thinking about these design changes right now than there's ever been in the entire history of the solar industry. More people looking at innovative ways to do things. And of course, the big guys are caught in a real interesting, awkward spot. The big guys have all automated. And boy, it costs a lot more to fire a robot that you've trained than to fire a human being you've trained. The fact is, it'll be the small manufacturers that we will see innovation from. And as soon as they prove the product is successful, they'll get ripped off by the big guys and driven out of business anyhow. That's the way things grow. By 1966, the largest solar system ever manufactured was a 1 kilowatt array on a satellite. We'd finally broken the 1 kilowatt barrier. From 1 watt to a kilowatt. 1970, Earth Day. Dennis Hayes over here, the man that started Earth Day. There he is. I love this psychedelic lettering behind him. And look at the woman back there with the classic 70s hairdo. And Dennis, he's growing out his sideburns and getting along and back, but he's not quite looking like a druggie yet. In fact, I love this crowd here at Earth Day. You look at this crowd, where are the hippies in it? Hippies were mostly something invented by Hollywood, invented by the media. This is just a bunch of people from all walks of life that are excited as hell, not about solar, but about the whole damned environment. And that's the only reason I'm interested in solar, is it's an easy way to be an environmentalist. You don't have to tie yourself to a tree. Okay, about the same time, 1976. This is taken directly from BPA's manual. I wanted to print it the way it was printed because this was done in the era just before word processing. This is what all government documents look like. But this is a highly important document. This document changed the world. Down here, we have hydro. Step out far enough so that I can... the beam's coming from above. We have hydro, we have thermal, stair-stepping up. 76, And this is a projection of energy growth in the Pacific Northwest out to almost the year 2000. And you look at the scale on this side, average megawatt hours stated in thousands of megawatt hours. 1,000 megawatts is roughly the size of one nuclear reactor. And so what Bonneville Power Administration and the Northwest Power Planning agencies of the time are saying that we're going to have to build 46 it works out to 46 reactors between 1976 and the year 2000. This was the best and the brightest engineers in the Pacific Northwest with the sharpest pencils available doing load forecasting. How many reactors did we build? Well, we tried to build 5. We got 1 finished. And the other 4 became the largest municipal bond default in the history of the world. That was back when a $2.5 billion bond fault was big money. They were simply wrong. They were obscenely wrong. Luckily, there were people in the Northwest that called them on this. They even went so far as to introduce the PNUC bill, which would have allowed them to add all of the costs of all the reactors, even into the future, into the current electric bills. It was a good deal for the utilities. They could build endless reactors and have an absolute guarantee, plug it into the rate base, and charge the ratepayer. Okay, this was the projection. The next slide, I'm going to jump ahead on our timeline and take a look at where we ended up. Okay, again, we're looking at Northwest electric consumption from 79 to 2009, roughly the same time span. This was our base load, 183 megawatts. We brought online 19 megawatts of conservation. For the first power plant, second power plant, we brought on 4, 7. Next power plant, we brought on 7. We brought on 7 more. We brought on a total of 20% total savings, 20% absolute savings in energy consumption. We use less energy in the Pacific Northwest than we used in 1976, in spite of the best projections by all of our utility companies. I think this is pretty amazing stuff. This is why we're where we are today. This is why Seattle City Light is now charging 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And I can't see how Seattle City Light or any Northwest utility is going to decouple their rates from the national rates. And the national average increase in rates for the last 10 years has been 3.5% a year. If we just sat still, conventional electricity would price itself out of the market unless they do something. Well, obviously, they're going to have to do something. And ultimately, what they'll try to do is solar. And I don't work for the state anymore. I can say any damn thing I want nowadays. It isn't going to work. It is not going to work. The utilities are not going to pull the wool over our eyes. We're going to meet 85% of our energy needs in the Northwest for the next 20 years through conservation alone. Oh, but also in 1976, something else really crazy happened. Bill Yerkes opened Solar Technology International. He used to live over on Maidenbower Bay. He worked at Boeing, and he started a couple of different solar companies. But he starts Solar Technology International. Exxon opens Solar Power Corporation. And Arco purchases Solar Technology from Bill Yerkes. Bill Yerkes suddenly became a very rich man, and Arco bought him a private jet to fly back and forth to do all the important solar business. I mean, this guy's flying around in a jet. Oil company money is pouring in. Remember, this is also the oil crisis. And in the oil crisis, what were the oil companies doing? Getting very, very, very rich. You or I may have been waiting at the gas pump lines, but we were waiting there to hand large amounts of money over to the oil companies. They were making windfall profits. And even at this point, they saw the bottom of the wells. They've always known about unconventional oils like fracking. It just wasn't cost effective yet. It just didn't make sense to extract that oil. But they're looking at the bottom of the wells and saying, hey, we've got to get a new act. So, you know, somebody in the one division says, oh, buy a solar company. That ought to happen somewhere out there about 30, 40 years. And we'll be in a prime position. That causes a tremendous amount of money to flow into solar. That large volume investment by the oil companies, because they were too rich and too stupid to do any smart planning, just like the electric companies, they capitalized solar. The only people besides the oil companies that were helping to capitalize solar on a significant level in the 76 through 1980 time period was organized crime. Solar was brought to earth, one, by the oil companies, two, by the marijuana growers in Arcata, California. They were the only people that could afford to pay $60, $50, $40 a watt for solar, other than repeater stations. That's the other market. That was the one that Bill Yerkes got into, was providing power for remote radio stations. You got the satellites beaming down the message, but you got to track that message constantly. Oh, that means your message is coming down over that hill for a while. You better have a solar receiver over. You better have a receiver over there. What am I going to power it with? The only choice again was solar. So solar found a large market for remote applications, both remote homes, remote lighting systems, and repeater stations. The next niche that they find after that is third world pumping. In fact, the third world has always been, since we hit about $20 a watt, been almost a perfect market for solar. We could sit back and not do anything, and ultimately solar would come down to affordable prices for rich people like you and me, because ultimately enough poor people around the world would have bought solar to drive the curve. We could have left this all to economics. I'm glad we didn't, because coincident with this price curve is things like global warming, acidification of the seas, death of the arboreal forest. I mean, we've got quite a few crises that this sort of technology can lend something to. I'm going to jump all the way to the end for a minute, and then we'll go back and finish the timeline. This is from 1977 on our timeline to the present. This is what modules cost then. We've come down this time since then. How have we done it? First was the introduction of glass-on-glass modules. That was Bill Yerkes' big idea. He got it driving across the Evergreen Bridge after he'd been partying late at night in Seattle, coming home at sunrise, sun shining in the windows. He realized, wow, I could encapsulate solar cells inside my windows. And that's where glass laminated modules came from. We owe it to the evergreen floating bridge. And that brought about what I like to call the era of 12-volt homes. These are true crazies. These are people who are perfectly willing to live with 12-volt lights that they took out of, originally they were taken out of the license plate lights on their cars. Then they discovered you could buy a big Edison-looking bulb. And then they discovered miracle of miracles. They discovered compact fluorescence. Not compact fluorescence, really, but small fluorescent lighting. Compact fluorescence wouldn't fully develop for some time. But this is the era of 12-volt homes. It's a new niche market. It begins to drive that curve down even more. Then, a very important event occurred. Hart Interface built an inverter that was efficient. Crazy idea. I mean, my first inverter, I called it my inverter stack, and I had a 1,500-watt dynamo, and I had a 500-watt trip light, and I had a 200-watt trip light. I had a 100, and I had a 50, and I could plug whatever appliance in to the appropriate inverter, because that's the only way you could operate it efficiently, is by juggling inverters, because the efficiency curves on them look like this. It produced at their rated output. Anywhere off their rated output, it was in the gutter. But Hart builds one that instead of being a square wave and all the stuff outside the sine wave is wasted heat, they built a 3 steps up and 3 steps down. They called it a modified sine wave. Okay, all of a sudden you could run a range of appliances off the same inverter. Not terribly efficiently, but a lot more efficiently than it had been. We're up in the 80% efficiency rate. All of a sudden, there was a whole new category of off-grid home that could be built. There were homes that could have refrigerators instead of just RV refrigerators. You didn't have to use RV lights. You could reuse real lights. You could use waffle irons, toasters, etc. That creates a whole other emergent niche. It drives the cost down even further. We enter what I call the era of off-grid AC homes. Alternating current in your off-grid house. It was amazing. Then, out here about 85, we've got trace engineering introducing what they were calling a true sine wave. It was actually 27 steps up and 27 steps down. But you can put that on a capacitor and smooth that sine wave out to where you could fool a variable speed motor into thinking it was getting a pure sine wave. All of a sudden, you had AC power that was grid equivalent. And very quickly, the Trace boys figured out one other thing that was quite interesting about that true sine wave inverter. The utility couldn't tell it from their own power. The utility could not tell that sine wave from its own power. Oh, yeah, by the way, one thing I want to point out, too, is notice a couple of things I love about this module is, one, it says rejected module, no warranty applies. And there's no UL listing on it. There were no UL listed modules. UL listed modules don't appear until the 90s. In 95, we saw the first microinverters appear. They were made in Germany, imported by Trace, and sold as the microsign. It was pretty neat because it was God, you talk about simplicity. It produced 110. You could literally plug this sucker into any outlet, and it would do its job. Not exactly the thing UL guys would be terribly happy about. But Unfortunately, it didn't find a niche to fit in. There weren't people out there willing to spend $300 for a 100-watt inverter. Well, there were a few crazies. Then in 1998, we passed a net metering law in Washington State. This is the second net metering law in the nation. And SMA and Xantrex both introduced grid tie inverters in the year 2000. Unfortunately, for Xantrex, they designed their grid tie inverter up in Arlington, and they wrote out a power tracking algorithm based on our cloud cover. And, you know, our cloud cover is nice and slow and calm. The first ones they put into the field, they put it in down at Florida Solar Energy Center. You go to Florida, what happens? A wave of clouds comes in, a wave of sunlight, a wave of clouds, 5 waves of clouds a day, 5 waves of sunshine a day. It drove those power tracking algorithms nuts, and those inverters fried their own brains. And Trace tried, it's not Trace anymore, they've been bought out by Xantrex. You notice, I don't know if they've corrected it, but it used to be when you'd type Xantrex into Word, the spell corrector would change it to anthrax. I can say that. They're a Canadian company now. Yeah, they bought them out, moved them north. But Xantrex's big mistake was they didn't get out there and tell their dealers that they had a problem. They tried to hide the problem. And in this day and age, you just don't do that. SMA ran into a problem with their inverters after they'd been importing them for about a year and a half. They brought in a team of 100 employees from Europe, gave them blank tickets to fly anywhere there was a problem and to fix it. SMA dealt with their problems very directly and very openly. Consequently, Xantrex never did regain the market position it could have had. I mean, what we're watching here is what was a promising industry in Washington State, the inverter industry, die. And die because of bad individual mistakes. And notice I said individual, because everything bad is the responsibility of some individual. No they does anything wrong. It's somebody that you can identify that made the decision. Okay, that brings us to 2000. The year 2000, and I like to describe that as the year grid tie solar began. All of a sudden, all the technology was in place. What was driving all this, though? In the background, this is the most important thing that's happened to renewable energy in the last 100 years. The election of Jimmy Carter. He creates the Energy Extension Service. This is all in his first year. He creates the Energy Extension Service. He creates Western Sun and 4 other regional agencies tasked to promote solar. And he creates a 25% tax credit for conservation and renewables. He treats conservation and renewables the same. And I think that was visionary of him. This is actually a photograph from up on the roof of the White House. Those are the solar modules, solar panels rather, that he put there. Okay, he also created NREL in '77. This is our friend Dennis Hayes again, as a callow youth and as a wise old sage in the forest. Siri has done most of the good research and development work that's been done around solar. At this point, solar manufacturing production worldwide in 77 had exceeded 500 kilowatts. Yeah, worldwide we had made 500 kilowatts of solar. This is an industry taking off, right? This is on the knee of the curve. It's going somewhere. Oh, and also at the same time, 1979, WWASI, Western Washington Solar Energy Association. It was a group in the Puget Sound Basin. Actually, at this time, there were 23 solar energy organizations in the state of Washington, scattered across 29 different counties. They were organized on a county-by-county level. But they did something that I thought was really great. They did what we called the Great Solar Shootout. What was the shootout? They raced a flat plate against a solar mat system against an evacuated tube system. This was done down at Seattle Center. It was done in July, on a good morning in July. 80 gallons of water. The task was to raise the 80 gallons of water to 120 degrees. And we all knew that the evacuated tubes were just going to kick butt in this. And the solar mat wasn't even going to be, swimming pool heaters weren't even going to be a runner. Right? And they all had the same surface area, exactly. Okay, so they're sitting side by side, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're turned on. Which one won? The unglazed swimming pool collector beat the flat plate, beat the evacuated tube. The flat plate beat the evacuated tube. The evacuated tube system got skunked. This was a major lesson in physics for me. I didn't really assign adequate value to a concept that anybody that deals with energy has to know. Delta T. It's all about delta T, temperature differential. If the air is just as hot as your collector can't lose any heat to the air. It'll be 100% efficient. On the other hand, if I've got good insulation and I'm getting really, really hot inside, I get up to 180 degrees, 190 degrees, I'm radiating all sorts of heat back out. Yeah, the reason the solar roll won is because of the design of the experiment. You always have to, in every one of these cases, ask yourself, what are we trying to show? What are the conditions? And is the technology suited to the condition it's being applied to? This was an epiphany for me. It was like, oh, everything I know is wrong again. 1980, Arco Solar builds 1 megawatt of solar in a single year. That was such a significant event that year at the ACES conference, they rented an entire auditorium and lined it with food and beer and wine and everything else, and had one hell of a party celebrating 1 megawatt of solar. How many dealers in this room have done a megawatt of solar in the last year? Yeah. And I think if Jeremy was here, we'd get a hand. Yeah, I think. Let's say since you've been in business. Yeah. Arco, the biggest solar manufacturer in the world, celebrating wildly their 1 megawatt of solar. And the way they did it, of course, is they stuck half of it in, this is San Onofre. By the way, take a close look at those modules in San Onofre. Notice how discolored they are. The backing materials are breaking down in those. In fact, right now, SMUD is getting ready to scrap the 3 installed megawatts at San Onofre. They're going to scrap them. And the scrapping contract requires the modules to be crushed. I don't think you guys want those modules coming on the market competing with you, but, God, they should go to the third world. Something should happen. It's a cause celeb. Somebody ought to pick up and do something about it. At least make a noise. Another good example, Bill Yerkes told Arco, the parent company, not to do this. This is Carrasco Plains. They tracked. Ooh, that's cool. They tracked, and they put reflectors on them to concentrate the light. So they had almost 3x light. There's the modules after about 10 years. They were sold by Real Goods as Carrasco Plains Goldens. And then the ones that didn't test so good were test less well were sold as Carrasco Plains Coppers. And then you finally got down to the bronze level. But a lot of hippies bought them, and they went back into use. Actually, that same year, NUAC, Northeastern Washington Appropriate and Creative Technologies, which was our solar association, we began doing group purchases at that time of modules. And we stunned the world. Well, we stunned America by purchasing, in a single purchase, 14 kilowatts of solar. Nobody had ever done a bulk purchase of that size. Then we produced in 1980 the first copy of Solar Washington magazine. This is not the actual cover. This is a reproduction of the cover. This was the cover. This magazine, because there was Western Sun money involved in the publishing of it, ended up sequestered in Jay Luboff's basement forever. I mean, I begged Jay to give me an original copy of it, and he wouldn't do it because, that is Washington's governor, Dixie Lee Radiation. I thought it was nice putting her on the cover of the Solar magazine. In 1980, the United States Congress passes the Northwest Power Planning and Conservation Act. Let me give you a little background on this act because it's really, really, really important. The reason it's it's three reallys. That's how important it is. First, the utilities had tried to run through the PNOC bill, which was going to give them carte blanche to build all the reactors they wanted. People squawked and screamed and got hysterical about it. The public was listened to. And so the utilities came up with another idea. They said, okay, we'll do a power act that allows us to charge for nuclear after we've done the cost-effective conservation and renewables. Because they got that weasel word cost-effective in there. And they knew, utilities knew in their heart of hearts, you couldn't do conservation profitably. It cost way too much to put insulation in houses and glass on windows and caulk around doors and weather gaskets and stuff like that. Well, the fact is it worked. And in a response to the environmental community was absolutely against the passage of the Northwest Power Planning and Conservation Act, the act that the region is built on. And this, I think, was truly a miraculous feat of political legerdemain. I mean, I was calling up people just before the vote, the day before the vote, trying to talk my friends out of supporting this bill. Everybody was calling up their congressman, driving them nuts with it. But it passed. the environmental community was ready. Thanks largely to the NRDC. I hate Ralph Cavanagh. I wish he'd get out of Washington politics, but he's been one of our best friends. And I can't, you got to accept good ideas no matter where they come from, even from Californians. NRDC released immediately a model conservation plan as soon as the act was passed. They had been working on it for some time. Okay, that framed the debate. Anything Bonneville, anything the utilities did now would have to be in response to what the model plan said. The debate was defined by the environmentalists. And what they did is they said, okay, you said you'd do all the cost-effective conservation. We're going to hold your feet to the fire. You're going to do all the cost-effective conservation. And the Northwest Energy Coalition was founded, and they've done a wonderful job of making sure that all the utilities in the Northwest lived up to these requirements. If they hadn't been there, I guarantee we'd be living in a world that had a bunch of mothballed nuclear plants, and we'd have 20 cent a kilowatt hour. That'd be fine because solar would be cost effective, right? The Washington Solar Council joined the coalition, and the Washington Solar Council also created, largely with Shannon McCormick's help. Shannon is an old-timer from PSE. At this time, he worked for Energy Extension. I have to tell this story on Shannon McCormick. Some of you guys have probably worked with him. I know Dave, our own Dave, has worked with him a lot. Shannon's retired now. But when he worked for Energy Extension, the first boss of that program was what everybody who worked under him described as the worst jerk they'd ever worked for. Shannon, if you know Shannon, he's a very quiet, softly spoken individual. Shannon would always come to work earlier than anybody else. Oh, by the way, Steve Denner hated pigeons. And they were all in the office was in the old Smith Tower, and Shannon would go into Steve's office, open up the window, and sprinkle birdseed down on the ledge out of sight so that pigeons would flock to Steve Denner's window all day long. Now, I think that's a wonderful example of subversive, there's some negative words you can use to describe that, the behavior. But wasn't it wonderful? Steve Denner did quit. Shannon went to work for Puget. But Shannon also was very active in organizing, and I haven't seen a repetition of this, the Washington Solar Business Association, with 23 member businesses at the time it was formed. Its primary goal was to develop a set of business ethics for the industry. And, as I watch, we're on the hook of the curve. We're on the hook of the growth curve. And we're going to see a lot of tin men. We're going to see a lot of people that enter the business because there is going to be big money to be had. And that's all they're going to be interested in. Some of the members of Citizens for Solar Washington, the Washington Solar Council, these are people I'm still in contact with. Tom Ekman, he was a member. He's now, for years, he's been the director, the conservation director of the Northwest Power Planning Council. One of our guys got into that, and Tom planned early on to get that job, and he took it, and he's stayed there ever since, and he's the reason we've achieved the conservation we have more than anybody else out there. But he's needed the backing from many groups, which the Conservation Act Coalition brought together all those groups to give authenticity to the statements that the council was making, and also to hold the council's feet to the fire and make sure they behaved. Terry Oliver organized the 1979 first Solar Washington conference held in Vancouver, Washington. Terry now works as Vice President of Product Development at Bonneville Power Administration. Terry is in charge of thinking out there in the future. If you have any inventive stuff, ultimately Terry will be one of the people it's vetted through. Tony Usabelli, he's director of the Department of Commerce's offices. Mike Lubliner, he's the director of advanced housing technology at the Washington State Energy Office. Sandy Fugit, she's a solar home designer in Olympia. Shannon McCormick, we've already talked about. Jeff Collum is one of our local installers. Mike Nelson, he's just this guy that talks about solar too much. Terry Egner. Terry Egner moved from Washington to Idaho, and he was the assistant director of the Idaho Energy Office. And David Haskell, one of my best friends from this era, when he left, he went to New Zealand. And it was sort of like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man will be king. He went down there and became the director of the energy offices for the country of New Zealand. And every year after a bad election, when I would announce to my daughter, well, I think we're going to move to New Zealand, go down and hang out with David, Melissa was listening to me, and she was kind of thinking, well, when are we going, Dad? And finally, as soon as she graduated from college, she left for New Zealand. Passive 81, held in 1981. It was a national event. It was a national solar conference on passive construction. Okay? Larry Palmiter of Ecatope trashed passive solar homes in Northwest in front of thousands of people. Larry simply pointed out that $1 saved through insulation is far cheaper always than $1 gain or a BTU gained through glass. That it's cheaper to save than it is to gather new. It's a pretty straightforward, pretty clear principle. Larry Palmiter had to get up after he did his paper. The last day of the conference, they brought him up onto the program at lunch so he could offer an apology to all the solar advocates he had offended. And anybody that knew Larry Palmiter, he died recently, knows what a wonderful curmudgeon he was and how his numbers were always right. That was the awful thing about him. You've got a question. Right. Yeah, you look at the amount of energy saved by that insulated wall, it's always going to be more BTUs saved than you're going to gain through the windows. Now this is in the Northwest is the operative term. This is not true in New Mexico. New Mexico, I could quite honestly go out in the desert, pull a baggie over myself and stay comfortably warm in winter in the desert. But the fact is we have no beam radiation to speak of. What do we have? We have 3 days of sun in December. And yeah, you can store heat through thermal mass. You ain't going to store August's heat for use in December. like you can through the cheap trick of net metering. Net metering is a cheap trick, but it's one of our most valuable tricks, especially where we are. And net metering is going to come under fire. The utilities are going to want to bring down net metering. We've got to figure out ways to make it in their interest to preserve it. (1981), Ronald Reagan is elected. Dun, 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 dun. Removes solar from the White House. Tries to defund NREL. Luckily, Congress wouldn't let him do that. He guts Western Sun and all the other regional solar agencies. He cuts energy extension's budgets. Luckily, in the Northwest, energy extension continues because it's contracting with Bonneville Power to do the conservation work that it was doing before. Bonneville Power and the Power Act, because of the Power Act, Bonneville felt they had to maintain the conservation efforts. And so we survived Reagan's cuts by being under the umbrella of BPA. BPA, when they can get something out of it, love to be a part of the federal government. When it's not profitable for them, they pretend like they've got nothing to do with Washington, D.C. And in this era, they played pretty much like they didn't know who the guy with the tablets was. He allows the tax credits to expire in 1985. 1986 rolls around. Washington State now has 4 remaining solar companies. We had 23 when the Business Association was started. And I tell you, anybody that survived this nuclear holocaust that Reagan brought down was one mean cockroach. The surviving solar dealers that survived through this are tough, good businessmen. They had to be. Conservation community turns its back on renewables. They saw renewables as the primary threat to conservation. And they argued endlessly, well, I'm sorry, Mike, it just doesn't meet the least cost test. And I have always said, well, yeah, that's because you're not applying all the environmental and social values to the energy resource. And they still haven't. Nobody has added, for instance, geographic location into least cost planning. They treat least cost planning as if they're doing the least cost for anything anywhere on the globe. And I think that's simply logically flawed. You have to identify the economic region that you're doing the planning for. And then those questions like job creation begin to make sense. And probably one of the great goals should be incorporation of local economic benefits into the least cost planning process. Solar enters the dark ages. But God still loves you. In 1993, the city of Aachen in Bavaria adopted the first feed-in tariff. It didn't begin on a national level. It began with one city. From 1994 to 97, 30 more Bavarian villages adopted the Aachen model. It wasn't until the year 2000 that Germany adopted a national feed-in tariff. Remember, the German tariff is in the year 2000. That's the year everything changes, that household solar begins to enter the market. The newest niche market is residential solar. California adopts net metering. Tom Stars, by the way, how many people know Tom Stars? A few hands, yeah. Tom Stars, you got to know Tom Stars. Tom Stars used to live out on Vashon Island. When he was in graduate school, though, he went down to California, and he graduated from the University of Washington Law School. He'd got his law degree. He tried one case, decided he didn't want to be a lawyer, decided to go get a doctorate in public policy, moved down to Berkeley. While he was in Berkeley, this notion of net metering got floating around in his head. And so he wrote the legislation in California, the first net metering law in the nation. Meanwhile, 1998, the Okanagan Electric Co-op adopts the first interconnection policy in the state of Washington. Snohomish County adopted one just shortly after Okanagan did, and I reviewed both of them. I loved comparing them. The Okanagan interconnection policy was on two sides of one sheet of paper. Snohomish County PUD's was 136 pages. You know, I submit that the governing principle here is the quantity of paper you produce is directly proportional to the number of attorneys on staff. You know, at the same time that they adopted, we organized the first Northwest Solar Summit, and we held it at Sun Mountain Lodge. And one thing that we did very deliberately in organizing it was just invited solar companies, and this included national solar companies, local solar companies, and utilities. We held the public at arm's distance right at first because strategically we wanted to bring the utilities and the industry into a cloistered room where they could ask questions of each other without being afraid of embarrassing themselves in public. Because one weakness in a public forum is people are sensitive to appearance. People won't ask questions that they need to because they don't want to look stupid. So we get them all in that cloistered room, and we make sure they can't leave the mountain during the evenings. They have to go to the bar and drink together. I'm also, and I'm going to have to find a new term, but it's so Shakespeare that I can't leave it alone. It's what you have to do to accomplish something as a group is form a band of brothers. It's only through that unity of shared work and hardship and eating together is important. Do you find the ability to move forward on an objective and accomplish it? And that's why we did it originally in those isolated sessions. And our utilities, I think, moved very rapidly. And when we did go for legislation, we already had the utilities on board. And because we began working in rural communities, we also had people who would be shrugged off by us Seattle liberals as being conservative. During this period of time, we had consensus from both sides of the aisle on moving forward with this sort of technology. Bless him, but Al Gore, you polarized it. You know, everything Al Gore has done has been wonderful, but he was a lightning rod, and there's been a strong polarization around renewables since. Solar Washington was formed as a SEIA chapter in 1998. We formed as a SEIA chapter initially because SEIA was the one that came out and tried to organize us. Later on, after we got organized and got some legislation going, Tom Stars said, Mike, you know, I was talking to national ACES, and they said Washington State has more ACES members than any other state in the union without an ACES chapter. You have potentially 137 members already. Why don't we switch from CO? And CO was kind of defunding a lot of their state efforts anyhow. So Tom Starrs made a good argument. We said, yeah, Tom, you just draw up the legal work and we'll do it. And so we became a ACES chapter. At the same time, Washington adopted a net metering bill. Tom Starrs wrote the legislation. The most important thing about our net metering, and this is the second net metering bill in the nation, we included a monthly carry forward. California was not allowing you to carry a credit forward. They were whacking it off at the end of the month. California picked this up out of ours, copied it, and introduced it into their legislation. But it's that carry forward that makes net metering the holy grail of solar. It's that carry forward that's key. And quite honestly, I think if we try to tell the utilities, well, you should have to pay us for the rest at the end of each year, we're picking a fight that I don't think is necessarily a smart one to pick. You need to focus on what battles are important, and they're going to be looking for reasons to get mad at net metering anyhow. There's no reason to pour gasoline on it. 2000, City Light installs a grid-tied system for Earth Day. That's still working down on Playray Plaza at Seattle Center. And Puget Sound Solar installs the first legally net-metered system in Seattle. Now, my barge was plugged into the grid when I was down on the ship canal. But that's an illegally net-metered system. I was pumping power out into the grid, but I didn't tell anybody, because all I did is I took my power cord and wired it into the input on my inverter. Yeah, it was that simple, and then plugged it into the shore power, screwed down the little screw ring so it wouldn't pull out easy. And I love this system. That's a good-looking system. Jeremy did a good job with that. Okay, and about the same time, I thought, God, there's stuff cooking in Aachen. There's stuff going on in Germany. And so I bought myself a ticket. Energy Extension wouldn't pay my way. I flew to Germany, and I went to Aachen, and I went to the house of the first guy in Aachen to install a solar system on his house. He was a computer engineer, and I visited him, and I asked him, gee, this is real exciting. Can I see your inverter? And he looks at me and says, Michael, what is an inverter? And then he got a look. Oh, you mean my converter. Your converter. Yeah. He said, oh, I don't know what it is. It's down the basement. It's red. And this guy was an engineer. And at that moment, I realized most of us are way too hung up on the technology. Most of the consumers aren't really interested in the technology unless they're geek themselves. And then if the client is a geek, sure, talk geek with them. But if they're not geek is really boring. Okay, and then, based on what I saw in Aachen and based on what I saw going on in Washington State, I got back, and Gary Shaver was working with me as an intern at the time, and we put together this Washington Solar Electric Industry Sunrise or Sunset, and we looked at what was happening with solar, the fact that it was growing nationally, and the fact that the industry in Washington State was in decline. And we presented this to the legislature and said, hey, we're missing a jobs opportunity here. Solar was sold to the legislature initially as jobs. The more systems, the more jobs. And actually, this is also the document that Honeyford discovered later on and is the key to his case against me for being a manipulative son of a bitch that's just doing all of this for money. Yeah. Okay, it took us from then until 2005 to get through the legislature. But real interestingly, 2002 is when we first started working on it, and we got Richard Rogers from the energy, he was at that time the energy staffer for the Senate. We got him to work with us. We got Bob Morton from northeastern Washington, a senator, so right-wing he makes Attila the Hun look like a liberal. We got Bob Morton, and we went out to West Seattle, and we got Senator Eric Paulson, who's, a classic Mad Dog Seattle leftist. And we got the two of them to be the prime co-sponsors of the legislation. And it was just wonderful. I mean, Bob and Eric would show up to testify on a bill, and they'd walk down the aisle together like some sort of a wild gay senatorial wedding and get up in front of everybody and testify in behalf of the bill. We came out, and still, I had been poorly treated by the Northwest Energy Coalition when we were drafting this legislation. They thought it was a terrible idea because it's not cost effective. It wasn't until after we got out of the Senate, 48 zip, everybody voted for it. Left and right. We had an absolute majority, both sides of the aisle. Of course, one thing that happens with the Senate is once people see something moving a certain direction, they say, I'm a lemming too. I'll run off the sea with you. And after it passed the Senate, all of a sudden, this bill was a golden child. By the time we went into the House, it was almost a done deal. Except one of the Democrats, who was the head of the finance, looked at it and said, oh, 2015, that's too far out in the future. I mean, gee whiz, we're 2005. He says, we'll give you till 2010, and then the funding will run out. And we palavered about it and said, do we want to walk away? Because it isn't going to work, and it'd be better to kill it than to create something that doesn't work. McIntyre used to be an aide for, what's his name, Senator Gaylord Nelson. Senator Gaylord Nelson was the man that picked Dennis Hayes to run Earth Day. Okay, we have a card to play. And people like Dennis, you never play those cards unless you're playing it to win. Anytime you use power, you lose it. But in this case, Dennis was more than happy to come down and testify. And of course, he's testifying to somebody who used to work for the man that made him the king of solar. Dennis has nuclear scale throw weight. And to use that weight ineffectively is one of the stupidest things you can do with it. But he went down and he testified, and he basically told McIntyre that the law made no sense unless it was 2015. Later on, I'm glad to say, it got raised again to 2020. primarily because we were so damn slow after the bill passed at getting an industry to come online. I mean, we thought, in fact, I thought we had Astropower in the pocket. Astropower had been out here several times. They'd gone up to northeastern Washington. They were going to open a module manufacturing plant in Republic, Washington. That's how we got Bob Morton into the game. Something in his district. Of course, all the other Republicans said, wait a minute, you can't build that. You can't build that earmark it for that county. We don't care if they're the most economically depressed county in the state. So they wanted to jump on and play pig at the trough. But Astropower backed off on the deal. They were about ready to go bankrupt. Astropower was a wonderful company, built by engineers. They forgot to hire good bookkeepers. Astropower went under, not because they didn't make one of the best products on the market, but because they didn't fill out their grant papers right with NREL. They got in trouble on federal funding, and that federal funding took them down. And so, poof, there went our biggest opportunity. And so we're looking around for a manufacturer, can't find any. The next year, sales tax exemption passed. This was not just a sales tax exemption for solar. It was a sales tax exemption for all renewables. In fact, right at first, it was just going to be a sales tax exemption for big wind. Big wind was going to cut themselves a fat hog and leave the rest of the renewable people fighting on their own because they don't count anyhow. They're just little guys. We're big wind. And luckily, all the little guys ganged up on the big wind guys and got solar and small wind added in to the sales tax exemption. But it was not without a fight with people that should have been allies. Obviously, we didn't expand that circle of friends far enough. We should have brought the Northwest Energy Coalition, not the coalition, we should have brought the Northwest Renewables Project in early on and made friends of them. But they primarily respond to their large donors, who are always people with large amounts of money. So looking for module manufacturers, I decided I better go to Norway. I made arrangements with REC in Moses Lake. They lined me up with visitations at all of their plants. And their business model is kind of neat because what they did is very actively said, oh, we're going to build modules in Sweden because that's inside the common market. We're going to build cells in Bodo. We're going to build wafer in Narvik. And they basically went around to all of these companies that had been bankrupted, are these cities that had businesses bankrupted by the passage of the environmental standards laws. Because all these people had been making toxic stuff, all of a sudden they were out of business. Well, the Norwegian government was really interested in getting new industries started in all these little communities. So when REC went public on the Norwegian stock market, it was the largest single offering in the history of the Norwegian stock market. They raised billions in capital. They were very well positioned. Interestingly, though, the real profit center for them has always been Moses Lake. Moses Lake has always been the engine of profit for them, primarily because they came in and bought the plant from Komatsu, the only Japanese company that could never make anything succeed. They bought it dime on a dollar and brought it back online and applied Norwegian industrial standards to it. And they immediately set about building a fluid bed reactor. They're making their money off this silicon that they can produce because they've got the hardware for nothing. But they know that they've got to cut costs more, so they build a fluid bed reactor. And that fluid bed reactor is the key to them being able to dominate the silicon market. Because also they're coming in right at the moment of the silicon shortage crisis. All of a sudden the world has changed because photovoltaics was running all this history off scrap left over from the computer industry. Wafer that wasn't good enough for computers became solar modules. But now, at this shifting point, there's not enough silicon to meet the demand of solar. Solar has to start using pure silicon. It creates a new market for solar-grade silicon. These guys are perfectly positioned to fit into that. Right now, and at this moment, when they take over, when they move into the market, silicon is selling for $450 a kilo. $450 a kilo for silicon. You know what it is now? Anybody want to venture a guess? $22? Good guess. Very good guess. It's 60 cents. From $450 to 60 cents. And at 60 cents, I've talked to them about this. They say, at 60 cents, Mike, we're still making good money. Because they got the cheapest electricity on the planet. They got their factories practically for free. What's not to like about that position? So what they're doing is they're lowering their prices, steadily driving down the cost of solar and driving Wacker, Hemlock, all the other silicon manufacturers down the same price scale. They're setting the speed in the race. It's like all of a sudden you're out there in a marathon and somebody takes off on a dead run and they continue the dead run for the whole distance. It's like nobody can compete with that. But they're moving slowly on it. And they've assured me that they can still make good money at 30 cents a kilo. That's a 50% drop from what it is right now in the cost of the raw material. NREL was wrong. Everybody was wrong in choosing thin film. Everybody has always said that silicon would not be able to compete ultimately. They have been the best and the brightest, the sharpest pencils, the engineers, once again have been dead wrong. Nobody anticipated it. 2010, first solar module manufacturer begins delivery. Okay, solar has now come of age. Luckily, very quickly, there was another manufacturer that came in and has managed to stop the natural monopoly that was created by the incentive system. But I guarantee right now, if you sit down with a sharp pencil and you take a Chinese module, you take a Chinese inverter, you take an iTech, you take a Silicon Energy, any of those modules, and you do on a clean installation, every one of those pays themselves back, has full payoff in less than 7 years. It's completely cost effective right now because through the incentive program, we have pulled the tipping point artificially back to the present. The only reasons for not doing solar now is, one, you've ruined your credit through stupid investments. Two, you've got a terrible roof. Three, you lack common sense. Four, you don't like the looks of it. Those are the only reasons. And they're pretty thin reasons. We are in a wonderful position. But there's some interesting clouds on the horizon. We're here. I love this. We're right here, right now. 2013, we're at the point where system prices have now crossed with residential prices. By 2015, 2018, they'll have hit utility costs. Not our utility costs, because our utility costs are the bottom line here. So it isn't until out of here around 2020 that it crosses the utility line, but it will cross the utility line. The last place on earth that solar will make economic sense is in the state of Washington. When we hit that point, right now we're at it residentially. When we hit that point commercially, the game will be over. Everybody building a house will say to themselves, well, do I have to hook up to the grid? Yeah, probably, because it's cheaper than buying batteries. But that cost curve is coming down too. We're going to see a collision of those two cost curves. Energy storage costs and solar costs. There's going to be another convergence. Sometime out there about when the first leaves in 2020 have to have their battery banks replaced. Those batteries are still going to have 80% of their life in them. I'd put my Leaf batteries in my garage at that point. And by the way, one thing that I think is interesting about this chart is this chart doesn't reflect the 3.5% annual inflation rate on the cost of electricity. It doesn't reflect the fact that historically it's gone up 3.5%. Oh, all sorts of places. This particular one was developed by NREL. Life cycle costs for photovoltaics, and these are squishy numbers, but I think they're real reasonable. At $8 a watt, if you can get a 25-year life out of the system in 3.5 sun hours, which you can get in Seattle, degradation 5.5%, system loss 0.8%, that gives you a 36-cent cost. If you can push the expected life to 50 years through good product manufacturing techniques, by clean work, if you can push that up, we can't push the sun up. Maybe global warming will. Degradation, we can improve on degradation rates. We can decrease system losses. That gets us down to 10 cents a kilowatt installed, cost of electricity over time. Versus Seattle City Lights, 9.6 cents, or PSE's 10.3 cents. It makes sense right now. But 2013, here we are. Who installed these systems? Yeah. Yeah, they've got shadows all over them. And yeah, this one over here is the one that alarms me the most. Because that's a hard shadow. Yeah, it's a chimney. Yeah, this is just straight behind a chimney at noon. Shading causes hot spots. Hot spots cause module failure. I love this one because here's some modules out on a test bed. They look pretty good, some discoloration, but not bad. Then you look at how many of you own an infrared camera? Anybody in the solar business needs to buy an infrared camera and needs to be taking pictures of their own installations after they've been in a while. It will give you a nice early alarm that you won't be told about by the best monitoring system you can buy. That camera will reveal things that monitoring systems don't. And what it will reveal is, look at these, they look pretty good, then look at the hot spots in that. That one cell is a complete failure. Yeah. And you blow one cell in a series, and what have you got? You've got a dead module. You look at this round dot module over here. That's looking pretty cool. This is a big system by Arizona Power Systems. You know, it's been well maintained. Big utility company taking care of it, spending a lot on solar. And when we take a photograph of it with a thermal camera, look at those hot spots all over the array. That array is going to prematurely fail. No, there wasn't. That's caused by variances in internal resistance. That's caused by bad solder joints. It's caused by moisture penetration through the back sheet over time. EVA loves moisture. It's hydrophilic. It loves to suck water. So you've got to put a good backing on it. One thing I think is pretty funny is this module, you go behind it, and you can see the light of the room around every wafer. You can see this exact pattern from the backside. This is a sharp module, and it's got a very, very thin layer on the backside. This module, you put up to the light, you can't see nothing through it. In fact, you run your hand along it, and you can feel how thick and heavy this is, because there's a layer of Tedlar, a layer of foil, a layer of Tedlar, and then EVA. This is completely encapsulated against moisture from the backside. There will be no moisture penetration except possibly through the edges. And it does have EVA as the laminate, so it will have moisture penetration ultimately from the edges. This module, I think this module could last 30 years. Oh, it has. This module, I'd put a little bit of money out of my profits in a savings account that I'd be building up for potential replacements. I know Ed Kennel used to do a lot of wind until he figured out that, yeah, he loved wind, but ultimately he says, sorry, Mike, solar winds. Wind will never be a thing in the marketplace. Ed says put your money in solar. But one thing he used to do is every wind turbine he sold, he'd add 10% to the cost of the turbine, just so that he would have a reserve fund to go out and fix the damn thing when it went south and it wasn't under any warranty issue. And I'd think about things like that. Ultimately, you're not going to become a success in this business by having the lowest price. You're going to become a success in this business by being somebody your customer trusts. It's all about trust. It's about forming a band of brothers out of your customers. And bad news, yeah, we're seeing failures. We're seeing lots of failures in the field, and we have no idea what the target on the failures look like. We just know there's a problem. It hasn't been quantified. Another interesting problem we have is this is during a few days in May. It's during the knee of the runoff. But notice the yellow is the power demand on the Bonneville system. The gray is the stuff we sell to California. Most of the time, most of the year, we're selling large quantities of excess power to California. That would be good if we could make a profit off it, but as a federal agency, Bonneville legally cannot make a profit. They've got to sell it to California just like they do to the utilities here, at cost. So, yeah, I don't think you can say that solar is going to solve this big impending energy shortage. Because the truth is there isn't one. What there is a storage problem. We have plenty of power. We just don't have enough storage left in the river. One thing that people don't understand about the Columbia River system is there are only 2 impoundment dams on the river. Mica Dam at the headwaters in Canada and Grand Coulee. The rest of our dams are run-of-the-river dams. The water must flow through them or over them. If we allow the water to flow over them, we get nitrogen enrichment of the water. The fry get rapture of the deep. They get the bends. They die. So we can't spill excess water over the dams. We've got to force it through the turbines to keep the fish alive. What's going to give in this system? Hanford's not. You can't shut a reactor down. You can't ramp it up easily. It's a multi-week process, bringing the thing up, ramping it down. It's base load, and that's all it can provide. And base load is antithetical to developing a modern renewable energy system. And one thing that I think this is the truth. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's dawned on me that in the Northwest, we're in a unique position. We're experiencing the problems that Germany is going to experience because of renewables in about 10 years, 15 years. We're already there because we forget that most of this is already renewables. We have a renewably based energy economy. We have to integrate highly variable resources. And what's the most variable renewable resource out there? Wind? That's what I'd guess too. Yeah, I'd make that mistake. What? Hydro, yeah. You watch from low water years to high water years, and the difference is amazing. It's as fluctuating as any other renewable. It just fluctuates on a longer time scale. But we have to build an energy system that can respond to all of these fluctuations. The only way I can see it is storage. Now, Banks Lake is the third system on the third mechanism on the hydro system that we can vary. We pump Banks Lake full, we run the water out, we generate electricity. And we can call on Banks Lake on demand, and it can help level the energy supply. We could raise the height of Banks Lake. We could flood No-Name Coulee up on the plateau above it. There are, in the Northwest right now, 14 pumped storage hydro projects in the permitting process. According to a study by Battelle Northwest, a combination of battery storage and pumped storage is the cheapest, I said least cost, energy storage system that we can bring online readily in the Pacific Northwest. It seems to me that most of that short-term, the problem with pumped storage is it takes about 10 minutes to turn it around from being pumped to generating power. That 10-minute lag time, if you're trying to manipulate the power grid, which has to be manipulated instantaneously, is a big gaping tooth. It's a hole in the system. That hole can be plugged very nicely with battery storage systems. How that evolves is to be seen. If I knew the answer to this, again, I'd be rich. Maybe those storage systems are going to be in our garage. Maybe they're going to be at the substation for the utility. Maybe they're going to be over at the wind farms. The wind farms I find a little bit unbelievable because the transmission lines over the Cascades are fully subscribed. Well, we can build a lot of extra wind and a lot of solar in eastern Washington, and we can send the power to California. The inner tie is full. There's no room on the train. We can't send more new renewables to California. Besides, when does the renewables happen? They happen in the middle of, they happen when the water's doing this. Especially the sun. Wind is kind of nice because it's scattered across the year. Solar matches perfectly on a summer peak. Well, we have a winter peak. And the summer peak, we're sending all the power to California now and plugging the grid up. So if we build large solar farms in eastern Washington, we'll be able to curtail them, just like we're now curtailing the wind. Same graph expressing a few different concepts. These are the wind curtailments that we saw during May. These are the wind curtailments that we had to shut the wind farms down to keep the wind from killing fish. Because we'd sure blame it on the wind, wouldn't we? We'd never blame it on the hydro system. Now, conservation can easily provide 80% of our electrical needs through 2030. One place we could pick up the additional electrical needs is by adding local solar. Both the DC, I already said that, they're full. We can't use those pipes. We can't send power generated in the Northwest. Besides, does it make any sense to build a solar farm, even in the Tri-Cities, to send it to California? I think they have a lot of empty land down there in the desert. That's the stream flow on the Columbia. Record low water year, record high water year, average water year. Peaking in June and July, right when we're peaking on the sun. Solar doesn't get us out of the problem of the river. $860 kilowatts on the Safeco Convention Center is currently the largest system in the state of Washington. And, you know, for me, I don't care if it remains the largest system. There aren't as many jobs. How many of you guys worked on that project? Of course not. Well, you know, Jason called me up and said, oh, we've made our decision on modules. And I said, oh, what did you decide on? And he said, we decided to go with Solyndra. And I said, that's really a brave choice. 3 days later, they announced bankruptcy. This is probably the largest system of Solyndras that will ever exist in the world. Let rich guys be bold and innovate. I love that. John Locke said, I love political experiments. I think all of my enemies should engage in them. See, we're going to be stuck with that thing forever. That's it. Any questions? Yeah. Parting words, we're on the knee of the hockey stick. It's going to explode. In any explosion, people get killed. Other people go sky high. Oh, I would get real interested in parking structures. I would get real interested in establishing partnerships with electrical vehicle dealers. I think that we got the tax exemption. You know, financially, we're in pretty good shape. The only thing is, you know, you've got this unease, as you see in 2020, the cliff is going to come. If there's a cliff out there, and if it starts to look real, I think that your best way to deal with that is to grow the hell out of yourself. To hire as many people as you can, to install as many systems as you can. Because every system you install on a house gives you 2 new voters. And this has always been about politics. It always will be about politics. And how many voters did this system buy? Paul Allen's? Yeah, I think growing the business, keeping an eye on facts as they develop. Legislatively, I think there could be some interesting tweaks done. I would always vet my tweaks against the utilities because Washington is unique. When I went to Aachen, my first reaction was, God, this is a neat idea. Too bad we can't do that in America. And then I got home and I got to thinking about it and said, wait a minute. There's one state in the union that we could pull this off. Washington. Why could we pull it off? Because we've got 39 utilities. We've got public power. We've got them running with us. What they're most afraid of is a threat to their rates. So we have to construct something that is not a threat to their rates. Oh, and this was Eric Paulson's insight. They all pay utility use tax, Mike. I said, no, they don't. The publics don't. They don't have to pay taxes. And he said, Mike, you're wrong again. Yeah, every utility in the state pays taxes. The only remaining problem we had, and this could be an interesting fix to gain the loyalty of a large number of utilities, is one of the problems I see is places like Okanagan Electric Co-op, which has been very supportive, very, very supportive. They're out of money because they've hit their $100,000 a year cap because they're a small utility. Small utilities run up against that stone wall quicker than the big utilities. Seattle City Light's nowhere near it. Puget Sound likes to brag about being kind of close to their cap. Maybe some very clever surgery on the incentive program is in order, but I wouldn't try anything major. I'd try things that wouldn't. Yeah. I'm going to commit a heresy. Paul Geip is one of my best friends. Paul Geip is a champion of feed-in tariffs. Jay Inslee is a champion of feed-in tariffs. If you want to go for a real feed-in tariff instead of our pseudo feed-in tariff, which we have, it's going to be an attack on the utilities. I'm not sure that Jay Inslee can win that battle. I'm not sure the legislature can win the battle. Utilities can't get everything through the legislature they want, but they can damn near defeat anything they don't want. I mean, you look at how many times did the Power Council go to the legislature and lose? Finally, the act was passed because they took it to the public. And that cost a fortune. And they called on every friend they had to get the money to run that campaign. I know Dennis Hayes was really, really sweating it because it came down to a very, very narrow margin on the vote. It's hard to put something past the utilities. Giving them a tax break, though, who doesn't like a tax break? Even the Republicans love it. In fact, they're the biggest lovers of tax breaks. They think you're doing God's work if you give somebody a tax break. Yeah, Joe. Okay, and I'll be real. I'm free now. I don't have to be nice. I think third-party ownership is going to run up against the utilities in big time. I think the utilities are going to look at that and say, no, wait a minute, this is creating an unregulated utility. They're going to say, oh, let's see, I'm a private company, I'm answerable to UTC. Oh, I'm a public, I'm answerable to my voters. I'm a third-party financer. I'm a utility that don't got to talk to nobody. I can do what I want. And a third-party financing scheme is going to try naturally, capitalistically, to extract as much revenue out of the system as they can. And quite honestly, I look at funding that's available like through the Puget Sound Cooperative Credit Union, and I cannot dream of a financing system I would have more respect for. You know? No money down, 15 years to pay, interest rate of 4.5%, and you don't even need to have a high FICO score. They'll qualify it against the system itself. My view is that if we'd only pay attention, the financing issue on a residential scale, not on a commercial scale, but on a residential scale, is solved. If I was interested in doing commercial systems, I'd hire myself a good tax attorney, and I would understand the federal tax credits. And you know, I've seen people produce spreadsheets that crank the numbers on commercial systems, and commercial systems right now are a no-brainer between the federal tax credit, the accelerated depreciation, etc. So I'd look at commercial. I wouldn't look at real big commercial. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, the nearby people is Silicon Energy. Yeah. Oh, by the way, one thing you didn't mention is, do you want to say something about the fire tag? Fire code? I'm talking to you, Dave. Say something about the...
Well, I kind of spoke briefly about it. The recommendations were pretty vague. So is there something in particular that you wanted us to...
Oh, we have to... No, I can't believe actually what came through. First, there's an exemption. There's an exemption for setbacks for systems on houses of 10,000 square feet or less, as long as the array doesn't cover more than 40% of the roof. Well, that's... I don't know. It hasn't... Yeah, it's like that one, you know, it's moving forward, it's alive. It's like, oh, yeah, this is walking still. I thought it was dead on arrival, but you know, it must be eating people's brains. Yeah, but you have to buy it on the Norwegian Stock Exchange. Yeah. It is publicly offered. Yeah, there's always a broker that'll take your money to make those arrangements.
Matched what has happened in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And it is, I think, a way to sell. But I wanted to ask you another question along the lines of your last slides. Because when I talk to people in the Lincoln, one of the things that always comes up is, well, we can't sell the electricity we want to California like we'd like to. We'd love to produce more here if we could sell more there.
Yeah, and if we built a new intertie, we could. Yeah. Yeah. You know, my reaction is we've got enough wires going all across the country. We don't need a lot of them. We need to generate where we are. I'm very much an advocate of a distributed generation system, and this big power shifting. Why would an investor want to invest in a solar farm in eastern Washington unless they were cut some really whacked tax deal that took all the money out of your pocket? Yeah, although the transmission losses aren't bad on the DC intertie. If they expanded it, it would have to be a new DC intertie. And that was the first one in the world built. And that's 40 years old now. They may be having to upgrade it. I know they put new converters on it recently at the cost of, what was it, $35 million. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, what's happened is it's prorated among categories of owners, and the lion's share of the money has been gobbled up by community solar, which, of course, burns the money twice as fast. Yeah. Yeah. Ellen, who's the primary dealer up there now is doing almost all off-grid systems. Yeah, so running up against that cap is a major problem.
How does that affect the credibility of selling the system based on incentive? You said PSE is close to that. The credibility of being solar, selling the system. Being if they bump up against the cap and your customers find out in 2.5 years that their incentive starts decreasing.
Well, I think that those are problems that can be worked on. We're not into a problem like that yet, and I think that that's something that can be patched. Why don't you guys get out of here?
Are you sticking around after, or do you have to go? All right. Everyone can come pester Mike with more questions down at Patty Coin. Thank you, Stu. Good point. Solar Fest is July 27th. Solar Washington will be sponsoring it, and the picnic in the park for Northwest Seed is Northwest Seed Picnic in the Park, July 21st. Hope to see you guys there.